Welcome to another week of Barstool Perspective, where we give you the rundown of the week's news in booze. We usually includes Brett Coleman Baker, but he is in Washington, D.C., preparing to help celebrate the Supreme Leader's birthday. We would like to start this week, a little tribute, pour one out, which means pour it down my gullet, to Sly Stone and Brian Wilson, both of whom we lost this week. That usually comes in threes. Who will be the next musician to die? Could it be Kid Rock? I'm just making a suggestion to the universe. Memorial Day numbers are in, and initially they seem positive. Total beverage sales grew 0.7%. But there are important caveats to that. Spirit sales were down and beer sales were down 3.6%. The outliers on beer were Mick Ultra, of course, and Busch Light. But it's even more depressing than that. Busch Light numbers were up specifically because of Busch Light Apple. That actually drove that brand as a whole up 10.6%. The biggest winners were non-alcoholic beer, which was up about 25% for Memorial Day, and energy drinks, because this includes all beverages. Energy drinks were up about 14.8%. So, America, getting dumber, you betcha. Big booze is getting battered. It's not just small businesses, craft breweries and distilleries that are getting hurt out there. The biggest alcoholic beverage companies are also seeing significant declines. The spirits industry in particular is blaming this combination of people being more health conscious around alcohol, which is leading to global decreases in alcohol consumption, especially higher ABV drinks like spirits. They also say that Gen Z sucks, and weed legalization is having a negative impact on the industry. Some of those I think are questionable, but what is not questionable is that big spirits are in fact down. Diageo, makers of Johnny Walker, Tanqueray, Casamigos, and previously maker of the P. Diddy tequila, they have lost, their share price has lost 50% since 2022. So they're in a continuing decline. Brown Foreman, which makes Jack Daniels, Woodford, and a bunch of other stuff, is down 2/3 since 2020. Which is a hell of a drop in a 5-year period of time. In January, they closed their Louisville cooperage. We talked about that at the time. They just sold that for $13.66 million. They have also reduced their workforce by around about 12%. So they're doing a lot of cuts, but they are still looking at a pretty bleak future. Constellation, who makes Modelo and Corona, took a $2.8 billion impairment on their wine and spirits business. We've talked about this in the past as kind of an accounting trick. An impairment means that you are effectively self-reporting on your corporate taxes that your company is now worth $2.8 billion less than it used to be because of loss of goodwill and sort of the soft aspects of your value brand. That is, however, just the wine and spirits part of Constellation. Constellation does predict that their wine and spirits are going to decrease about another 20% over the course of 2025. So that continues to look bleak. Molson Coors is down 10%. Who is doing well? Well, never fear. AB InBev is up 40% this year, and most of that is being attributed to share price. Most of that is being attributed to increased sales in Central and South America, as well as the slash and burn tactic that they have taken to their employees and their external spending and capital spending, etc. Non-alcoholic beer is once again being touted as the savior of the industry. They're up 22%. They have grown at a compound annual rate of 22%. every year between 2019 and 2024, while real beer has been down 3% in that same period. The Pomerantz Law Firm. You've probably never heard of them, and I haven't either. But they're huge, they're really rich, and how they mostly make their money is lawsuits on behalf of stockholders. They have started an investigation of Brown Foreman for defrauding investors. I have looked for details on this, but as best as I can understand, the nature of this investigation and the nature of these allegations are that Brown Foreman defrauded investors by being overly optimistic about sales projections. Now, I don't know what exactly they said or what they did, but to me this seems like a pretty slippery slope. Both Brown Foreman and Diageo are currently valued at about 16 times their projected earnings. So both of those companies are still highly overvalued, but what part of the stock market isn't? I don't know the difference. I don't know that line where puffery about, hey, we're doing great and people love our products becomes fraud, but I guess we're going to find out. In other stock news, Tilray has gone through the roof. That's a lie, but I had you feeling good there for just a second, didn't I? Actually, Tilray still sucks. It's flatline, and it is open today at about 42 cents a share. It's down from $1.45 at the beginning of the year. It's down from about $1.62 when we started advocating buying it at the end of last year. So, do we look dumb? Well, right now, but there are some things that are happening at Tilray. They just sacked all of their top leadership. The new beverage division president is Prinz Pinacat. I assume it's French. But Prinz Pinacat was formerly the chief growth officer, so he's been promoted. They also got rid of their president of spirits, as well as their president of the THC beverage division, and replaced both of those people. All three of those are still separate divisions, but Pinacat says that they are really looking forward to the ability for these divisions to work better together. That should be good news, because the reason we have liked Tilray from the beginning is Tilray bought up a bunch of mediocre craft breweries. That doesn't make it a good company. But when you look at it from a strategic standpoint, Tilray being originally and predominantly a marijuana company really looked like they were poised to start doing significant THC cannabis drink production and distribution. Why they haven't done that yet, I don't know. But hopefully this is a step towards that future, and it's a step towards Tilray being more solvent. There was other Tilray news this week. They approved a reverse stock split with a range of 1 to 10 to 1 to 20. What that means, a reverse stock split, means that if you own 10 shares of Tilray and they do a 1-10 split, then you're now going to own 1 share of Tilray, but theoretically it's worth 10 times as much. Why would you do that? For one thing, there are accounting reasons that I'm not even going to pretend to understand. But what I do understand is that to be listed on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, your stock has to be worth at least $1 a share. That wasn't a problem with Tilray until this year, and now it is. Once your stock remains below $1 for 30 consecutive days, you get put in the penalty box of the stock exchange. And if you don't get your stock price up, then you're put on a list, like given an opportunity, I think it's 180 days, to get that stock price back above $1, or you will be delisted. You'll be kicked off of both of those exchanges, and that certainly is not good for future growth of your company. So what a reverse stock split will do is bring the price of that stock, even though there's fewer shares out there, the shares will be worth more, and it will ensure that they're continued to be listed on the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. They have paused implementing this decision that was approved by shareholders this last week, but I don't know why. They may be pausing that decision just to play out that difference of how much they want to do this reverse split on, and maybe that is going to be dependent in part on whether or not the stock market reacts positively to these new changes in leadership and possibly announcements that will follow those changes in leadership. Now, that said, we continue to think that the hope and the value of Tilray is in THC and hemp-driven beverage expansion, but people are declaring the forms of cannabis are federally illegal in the U.S. You have to be careful about how that's structured and in a company and in a publicly sold stock. But the biggest one is Advisor Shares Pure U.S. Cannabis ETF, which is a really great, sexy name. Those guys have lost 96% of their valuation since February 2021. It's a very similar slaughter to Tilray, just coming a little bit later. The reasons for this are twofold. One, you see what happened with Tilray in Canada, and that was growth and sales just not meeting very optimistic expectations. The second thing is that even Tilray is a Canadian company with significant U.S. assets, and this U.S. stock, both of them are impacted by the failure to legalize THC on a federal level. It looked like we were definitely heading in that direction, but we have obviously reversed course. And we'll get back to that in a second, because we may be reversing course completely. Boston Beer, just as mentioned, that stock's currently at $214.40. That is down from around $289 the first of the year, when we were pretty bullish about that stock as well. And Boston Beer is really kind of part of that same picture. We think that Boston Beer has a lot of growth potential because it's poised to be potentially the biggest weed drink seller in the United States. And it looks like they're about to build a big facility in Cincinnati to do that, unless we see really negative news on the weed drink spectrum. We talked about cognac in the past. We talked about cognac enough that I actually went out and bought some cognac. And it's been a long time since I've drank cognac, and I can say that I still think it's just fine. But the Chinese love cognac. The problem is that for the past 18 months, China has been imposing a 39% tariff on French brandy, predominantly cognac, and that's really hurting the industry. They've been doing that in response to an EU tariff on Chinese electric vehicles of 50%. So they're locked in this whole trade war that is impacting cognac. We, of course, have these on again, off again tariffs with the United States and the EU. So cognac has been taking a massive hit. There's a possibility that they're going to fix this trade war between the EU and China this summer. But even if they do, cognac is an aged spirit, so it's going to take multiple years at this point to repair the damage that has been done. It's about $1.7 billion a year that cognac does in sales in China, and a big chunk of that is being cut off as a result of prices through the roof through tariffs. So cognac, still on the ropes and could die. Decreased spending by Hispanics is starting to show up in the marketplace. And this is across a lot of segments. Coca-Cola specifically attributes a 3% drop this year from decreased sales to Hispanic demographics. And there are other retail stores as well as chain restaurants. 75% of Hispanics report eating out less, so it's hurting restaurant businesses, particularly in specific areas. Hispanics are also a predominant driver of certain brands. They account for 30% of sales of all Corona. They also buy a lot of Modelo and Pacifico. Corona is down about 1%, so that's not a huge change yet, but it is expected to get worse for Corona in the foreseeable future. There are also brands that have a large Hispanic demographic that include Twisted Tea by Boston Beer. And Boston Beer is pretty concerned about the trends that they're seeing in decreased sales of Twisted Tea to Hispanic communities. They're responding to that by doing a lot of ads in Spanish, print ads, and also Hispanic social media influencers. Jim Cook says it's problematic, and aside from doing these ads, he says, quote, "I suspect there's not a good answer." Now, why is all this happening? In part, the Hispanic community is just impacted by the same negative aspects of Trumponomics as the rest of us, the uncertainty of what's going to happen next. But if you are a legal, meaning full citizen, Hispanic person in the middle class, you still have some of those general economic concerns. But depending on how your businesses are structured and what they are, they may be more acute. They're showing up that way, at least, in Hispanic populations, regardless of citizenship. If you are here as a legal resident but not a full citizen, we have seen recently that still means that you might get deported, drug off the street with no warning. So people are afraid. You're seeing the fact that Hispanics are just shopping less, they're buying less, both because they're economically afraid and they're saving more money, but also because they're sometimes just physically afraid to leave the house anymore because they don't know when they're going to be rounded up and shipped out of the country. Now, this is hurting some brands specifically more than others. Constellation Brands, as I just said, a big chunk of their sales are to Hispanic demographics, but Constellation remains bullish. They say that everything is fine. We have talked in the past about the fact that Warren Buffett continues to buy and double down on Constellation Brands. We're not exactly sure why, but Constellation itself seems to share his enthusiasm. They say that they expect to save $200 million over the next year by corporate restructuring and also through dumping a bunch of their wine. If you are a wino, the news is bleak, and we're going to get to more of it. But one of the big strategies for Constellation Brands is to get predominantly out of the wine business. They expect to save $55 million just by doing that. They're also seeing positive growth in the 21 to 25-year-old demographic. Not really sure why they specifically are doing well with the youth, but if you're in your early 20s and you're a beer drinker, it looks like there's a good chance that they are taking you in as a future customer, current customer. The Irish, partially my people. I am Irish, Welsh, German, three great drinking cultures, and I try to do my part to uphold the negative alcoholic stereotypes of those particular ethnicities. But the Irish are fighting back against that stereotype. Alcohol consumption fell in Ireland 5% the past year, and this continues a pretty significant reduction. The Irish are now drinking a third less than they did in 2001. So over this roughly 25-year period of time, alcohol consumption in that country is down over 33%. What the Irish are drinking has also changed somewhat. We seem to be drinking a lot more Irish whiskey than the Irish do. They're drinking a lot less spirits. They drink more beer, and wine is now actually the second most consumed alcoholic beverage in Ireland. The Irish now drink less than the French, the Spanish, and the Austrians. So you can either call that good news, or you can say, hey, my fellow real Irish people, get with it. Republic National is a distributing company. It is the second largest in the United States, second largest alcohol wholesaler. They have just announced that they're pulling out of California. They actually did this last week, and I looked at this story and we didn't talk about it because I didn't care. We're talking about it this week because this story keeps coming back due to the implications that it has on the broader industry. California is the single largest wine sale region in the United States. So they sell more wine in California than any other state. That is a $2.8 billion business to Republic back in 2023. So the fact that Republic is walking away from close to $3 billion in sales implicates a couple of different things. The first is that that huge, incredibly rich company is cutting its losses on wine, just like Constellation. It looks very, very dismal for the future of wine. It's not picking up new sales, as we've talked about a lot. The youth aren't drinking wine, and the industry is just getting a major shellacking. So the fact that Republic is pulling out of California altogether says, for one thing, that they think retraction is in order because the future of the business looks bleak for a while, particularly and specifically wine. Now there's been a change in California law there that makes it easier for beer distributors to distribute wine and liquor. So this distributorship called Reyes in particular, they have been eating some of Republic's lunch for a while now. They've picked up some of their major brands. So they think that in part, this combination of a lack of enthusiasm around continued wine growth and sales, combined with increased competition in California by Reyes in particular, that's driving these guys out. So there is, one, the implication of what this says about the industry as a whole, but two, there's also implications on what it's going to do to California wine producers. Because this distributorship is so large that it's not going to be easy for all of the brands, all of the vineyards in particular, wineries, that it represents to find somebody else to distribute their product. The really big names and the big brands, they're going to be fine. They'll go to somebody else. But Republic has been representing a lot of smaller scale California wineries. And a lot of those people just aren't going to find a distributor there to get their product out. So to some extent, a bit of this is going to be self-fulfilling. Republic is going to pull out because they don't believe in the future of California wine. As a result of Republic pulling out, there are probably going to be California wineries that go out of business because they don't have proper distribution channels. Now, what can we do about that? Oh no, let's save our California wine. Wouldn't fix everything, but direct-to-consumer sales would help. We've talked about that in the past. Direct-to-consumer sales is a growing part of the business. And for some people, it's really their strategy. You know, let's sell our brand online and let's really focus on selling directly through shipping. Wine is doing that, but it still continues to face a lot of pushback. 5 years ago, the National Association of Wine Retailers started the wine freedom movement. And the wine freedom movement was designed to reduce impediments to wine shipments across state borders. They, in that 5-year period of time, have succeeded in accomplishing very little. There are 47 states presently where buyers do get wine shipped directly to their doors. That sounds great. The problem is that there are still only 13 states where that's legal. So 34 of the 47 states where wineries are shipping direct to consumer, they're violating the laws, the consumer's violating the law, the winery's violating the law, everybody's violating the law. When you have such a high percentage of people openly violating the law, what it has said since the birth of this country is that is a stupid bullshit law. Problem is that this movement is driven predominantly by small-scale wineries, and it is opposed by huge wholesalers and distributors and people with a lot more money to buy lobbyists. If you're still drinking wine, what you're drinking may be different. A recent study of French wine drinkers shows that they are drinking white wines more than reds now. Not by a lot, but whites have pulled ahead. The 3 most popular varieties of wine among these French wine drinkers is Sauvignon Blanc at 31%. Apparently what Taylor Swift tells you to drink applies in France as well. Merlot is number 2 at 29%, and Chardonnay is 3 at 26%. As a result of these trends, there are French vineyards that are ripping out red varietals to replace them with whites. This next story is potentially really big. And it's probably best that Brett's not here for it, because there'd be a full-ass tirade. So let me take a couple of sips of beer before we get to it. The entire hemp beverage industry might get killed off. This is starting to look like an increasingly real possibility. Today, the U.S. Appropriations Committee moved a proposed bill, FY 2026 Agriculture/FDA Appropriations, really sexy name for this bill. They moved that forward. Earlier this week it came out of subcommittee. It's now in the committee. I don't really know what the hell it means that the committee moved it forward today. I guess it means that they decided to actually consider it as a full committee to move on to the legislature as proposed legislation. All of this is Republican driven, and obviously we have a Republican controlled Congress. So that makes the idea of this legislation, which would criminalize all forms of hemp drinks on a national federal level, not an unlikely thing to happen. So what's happened with these hemp drinks, to back up a bit, a lot of you know, some of you may not. The drinks that are out there for the most part that we call cannabis drinks are hemp drinks. they contain THC or they contain other cannabis derivatives like Delta-9, etc. But this farm bill that had been in place contained loopholes around levels of THC and what you can and can't do with hemp. So the way that these liquids are being made is you're taking what's essentially farm grade hemp that contains really low amounts of THC, and you're effectively like boiling that down to pull meaningful levels of THC out of these crops. It's not necessarily the most efficient way to do things, but it has still proven to be cost effective. And the THC that you're getting from farm grade hemp is good enough to give us these really potent and really good, at least in terms of getting you high, hemp drinks. So that's what's been going on. This industry, you have the legal marijuana industry that is only legal on a statewide basis. It's still criminally illegal on a federal basis. But these drinks, these hemp-derived drinks, they haven't been regulated at all because of this federal loophole. Now presently, we have 30 states that have either regulated these drinks or are in the process of creating legal frameworks. Texas, by contrast, is in the process of trying to criminalize all of it entirely. But if this legislation moves forward, what would happen is that on a federal basis, you would nullify all of those state approaches to these hemp-based drinks. And that's a multi-billion-dollar industry employing a lot of people at this point. It's doing a lot of positive things for a lot of breweries, why some breweries are still continuing to exist. So it would have a lot of wide-reaching negative impacts. It is definitely not a done deal yet, but we'll see what happens. If you ask the American people what they want, and who the fuck bothers to do that anymore, but when you do, what you find out is that, first of all, they don't really understand these hemp drinks, like what they are or how they exist and why they're not regulated and why they're regulated differently from THC, because it is moderately complicated. When you explain that to them, a majority of Americans, in a recent survey, I'm not just making this up, a majority of Americans say that they are in favor of legalizing hemp drinks, but putting them under a regulatory framework. And a majority of Americans also say that the appropriate regulatory framework would be to treat them like every other form of alcoholic beverage. So treat hemp drinks just like beer, wine, etc. That's what Americans think. What does the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States think? Well, they have weighed in to very helpfully say that they enthusiastically support this proposed Republican legislation to criminalize hemp drinks nationwide, because the Distilled Spirits Council, the purveyors of hard liquor, are really concerned about our youth and the possibility of underage consumption and the possibility of driving while impaired. Therefore, the answer is criminalize cannabis drinks. Self-interest? Of course not. On the topic of lunatics, there are new dietary guidelines coming out this week. Actually, they seem to make sense. They're going to focus on reducing carbs as opposed to the traditional kind of focus on reduction of calories and just fat. Only 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy. That's pretty terrifying. 74% of us are overweight or obese, and 40% of the entire nation now is either diabetic or pre-diabetic. In really bad news ideas, Industrious Spirits Company in Rhode Island is now making a vodka that tastes like cheese pizza. They macerate it with herbs, spices, and tomatoes, distill it, and then after that, they infuse it with mozzarella cheese. If you would like to buy a bottle of this vodka, I don't know how you do it, because why the fuck would you want to buy a bottle of that vodka? Our final story of the evening, of the day, of the afternoon. People sometimes get disappointed if I don't shit on Gen Z at least once in the course of one of these episodes. I have noticed this trend, but it is official because the New York Times says it's real. Gen Z, among the million irritating things they do, is they are refusing to open bar tabs. They are paying for every individual drink that they get with a credit card, but they're closing out every single time they do it. And I have seen this happen back when I was still teaching. I would go to breweries. I saw students do it. It drove me nuts. It drives bartenders nuts because it's really irritating. It's really irritating to everybody because it slows down the process. You open a tab, you drink a few drinks, you cash it out. Gen Z is not doing that. They say they're not doing it because it's part of being financially conscientious. It enables them to better judge how much they are spending if they're cashing out between every single drink. Okay, I can kind of have some respect for that. The problem is, number one, what you're doing there, bud, is slowing down everything about how this bar operates. And since your generation also insists on standing in a goddamn line at a bar to get a drink rather than understanding how a bar operates, you're slowing down the whole process. But beyond that, you're also screwing over the bars and the bartenders. As a result of not having cash and paying for every single one of those drinks with a credit card, bars are being charged both a percentage of sales by credit card companies as well as a per transaction fee. So if you drink 5 drinks on a tab and close it out, they're going to pay the same percentage, but they're going to pay 1 transaction fee. If you're closing out each time, aside from holding up the whole bar that's trying to get a drink, what you're also doing is causing that bar to pay that fee 5 times rather than once. And credit card fees have soared. Between 2020 and 2024, credit card fees have gone up 80%. So businesses are already being screwed by them. This is driving those fees up even higher, and bars are responding to that either by passing those fees on to customers or taking those fees out of what bartenders make or just raising their prices in general. So it's bad for everybody. Some bars and some bartenders are also taking the approach of just kicking back and telling Gen Z, look, man, you got to start understanding how society works. You got to understand how to drink in a bar. So we here at Brew Skies are happy to announce that we will be training Gen Z how to drink in a bar in the near future. Look for those classes and everything else we do right here. Please like, subscribe, all that bullshit. And I love you. Have a good week.